What's up, nerds, and welcome to the first episode of Nerd Space Games of 2026. And yeah, what better way to start out the new year than by going over some of the most exciting and incredible looking horror games that are scheduled to release sometime this year. From long-awaited sequels to remakes of the best horror games of all time to even smaller indie survival horror games inspired by the classics. Yeah, there's a lot of exciting horror games releasing in 2026, and one thing is for sure, there's something for everyone this year. So on this episode of Nerd Space Games, I want to showcase the 20 upcoming horror games I'm most excited about that are releasing sometime this year. For the record, I'm only focusing on horror games that are already scheduled to release this year, or at the very least, I expect them to release in 2026. Any horror games I don't think will launch in 2026, like Alien Isolation 2, Silent Hill 1 Remake, and even Kojima's OD, will unfortunately have to appear on next year's list. Well, unless they do end up releasing this year or they end up getting a release date for this year, then I have to go revisit this list at some point. So yeah, let's just hope I'm right about this and they actually don't come until 2027. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Finally, be sure to check out the official Nerd Space Games shop that features custom designs inspired by your favorite Resident Evil characters, all designed by the very talented Demento Artworks. But anyway, my name is Ruben with Nerd Space Games, and here are my top 20 most anticipated upcoming horror games of 2026. Let's get it. Number 20, Dark Pictures Anthology Series, Directive 8020. Wow, that title is a mouthful. Anyway, it's been over 3 years since Supermassive decided to take a break from their narrative-driven anthology series, Dark Pictures, but after a few delays, we are finally diving into the next story set in this universe, and man, does it look incredible. Sci-fi horror is a genre that has really picked up its game as of late, and the newest entry in the Dark Pictures Anthology series, Directive 8020, looks to continue that trend. This time around, the story looks to take a lot of inspiration from John Carpenter's The Thing, as the characters appear to be going against an alien species that has the ability to shapeshift into their allies. Okay, so maybe the John Carpenter inspiration is kind of on the nose here, but regardless, this concept for a narrative-driven horror game that's all about making choices and then facing the consequences just fits perfectly in this type of genre. The trailers appear to point towards Directive 8020 having a little more gameplay than the rest of the series thus far, something that's been missing from the Choose Your Path horror adventure story that Supermassive is known for. Directive 8020 looks to release in the first half of 2026 on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC. Number 19, John Carpenter's Toxic Commando. How ironic is it that we'll go from talking about Directive 8020, a horror game inspired by the works of John Carpenter, to now discussing a game that literally has his name in the title, John Carpenter's Toxic Commando. Now, I've been dying for a Left 4 Dead successor that actually doesn't blow. Toxic Commando allows 4 friends to play together and basically kick ass in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. Just like other games of this genre, you'll find yourself completely outnumbered by brain dead zombies, in which you get to go full on, guns blazing, with any resource you have available to wipe them out and complete the objective. Now, quite honestly, there's not a lot to say about this game, as it's pretty much what you would expect from something that takes heavy inspiration from Left 4 Dead. Mainly, I'm just excited to see if it's as fun as it looks. I love that the weapons and designs are more impressive looking than most Left 4 Dead clones, and the fact that you're given a bunch of unique abilities, tools, and even vehicles to use at your disposal, which makes this game stand out a lot more than other games inspired by Left 4 Dead. The only downside that I can think of is the fact that it doesn't appear to have a PvP asymmetrical versus mode like Left 4 Dead Survivor versus Infected mode, but hey, maybe in the future at some point, right? John Carpenter's Toxic Commando releases on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC on March 12th of this year. Number 18, Corpse Party 2, Darkness Distortion. One of my favorite horror games was the 2021 remake of Corpse Party. While this game was a visual novel and featured some pretty basic gameplay mechanics, Corpse Party also featured one of the most chilling ghost stories I've ever experienced in a horror game. In that first game, you find yourself trapped inside of an abandoned school in some sort of alternate dimension that's full of ghosts as you work to help 9 different characters escape from the demons roaming the halls of this school before it's too late. Between the twists, the consequences for making poor decisions, and many other things, Corpse Party was a chilling experience that stuck with me long after the credits. Well, Corpse Party 2 Darkness Distortion was announced a while back, and originally it was planned for a summer 2025 release, but was ultimately delayed into this year. Now technically there already was a second game, but it remains incomplete, and apparently this game will be the true sequel to the original game that I fell in love with all of those years ago. We don't know much about Corpse Party 2 except that it'll take place in a hospital this time around, and some sort of possessed doll appears to be the main focus this time, but regardless, I'm hyped about finally diving into this series once again, and trust me, I'm expecting to be absolutely terrified by the time the game ends. Corpse Party 2 Darkness Distortion will release sometime in 2026 on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, and PC. Number 17, Code Violet. Code Violet is an action horror dinosaur game that looks to release in just a few days, and as someone that has been dying for a good dinosaur horror game, man, I couldn't be more excited than I am with this one. So I know I've said this a lot in the past about games like Deathground and the upcoming indie survival horror game Ground Zero, but seriously, this one right here I think might very well be the game that comes closest to capturing the same vibes as the original Dino Crisis game, but with modern mechanics and visuals, of course. Code Violet clearly has a lot of things I want in a dinosaur horror game. It gives us multiple dinosaurs to fight, and it gives us all sorts of resources to deal with these multiple dinosaurs. And most importantly, the dinosaurs actually look kind of scary for once, not just your typical action dinosaur game. And yeah, I'll address the elephant in the room. Obviously, Code Violet will be one of those eye candy, dress them up, cash grabs type of video games similar to Killing Antidote. I mean, the damn trailer literally showcases the protagonist in as many revealing costumes as they could possibly get their hands on. However, it's easy to ignore that type of thing and just focus on the gameplay, and quite honestly, the gameplay looks like a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm excited for this game and I can't wait to get my hands on it, especially since it's a third-person action horror game about dinosaurs. Just please, I hope with every inch of my being, make this game allow dinosaurs to be scary in video games, please. I've been dying for a scary dinosaur horror game for years, ever since the original Dino Crisis, so please, Code Violet, make this happen. Anyway, Code Violet releases exclusively on PlayStation 5 on January 10th. Number 16, Ground Zero. Speaking of horror games inspired by Dino Crisis, Ground Zero is another one that I'm very excited about. Looking back at 2025, it was without a doubt one of the best years for indie survival horror games inspired by classic Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Tormented Souls 2, Echoes of the Living, and many more showed us that classic survival horror games with fixed camera angles in the modern era weren't completely dead and forgotten. However, one indie survival horror game that I was very much looking forward to before it was delayed into this year was Ground Zero. Set inside of a city that was, well, ground zero for a giant meteor strike. You play as a single protagonist roaming around the city trying to uncover the dark secret surrounding this event. In doing so, you'll encounter all kinds of mutations caused by the strike, which leads to creatures that resemble zombies and yes, even dinosaurs. In fact, there's a lot of traits about Ground Zero that ultimately makes this game feel like a cross between Resident Evil 2 and Dino Crisis 2. From the setting being a city overrun by zombie-like creatures like Resident Evil, to the fact that killing each monster grants points that you can use to purchase resources like Dino Crisis 2. Combined with the game using fixed camera angles, yeah, Ground Zero checks all of the boxes for a fan of classic PlayStation 1 survival horror games. It even has that PlayStation 1 retro design about it. And if you're not sure that this game is for you, well, guess what? There is a demo currently available on Steam right now. It might actually be on console too, I haven't checked, so I'll just throw that out there just in case. Maybe go check and see if they do have a demo available on console. But anyways, Ground Zero looks to release on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC sometime in the first half of 2026. Number 15, Silent Hill Townfall. While we might not be getting Silent Hill 1 Remake anytime soon, considering the fact that the game was only recently announced last summer, us Silent Hill fans can still get excited about the fact that we'll be getting a new Silent Hill game this year. Probably. That's right, Silent Hill Townfall is expected to release sometime this year, with rumors pointing towards a March release, and this game looks like it will once again be taking the franchise in a different direction. Unlike previous Silent Hill games, Townfall will be a narrative-driven horror game that is set to be the start of an anthology series. In fact, Townfall apparently will take a lot of inspiration from Supermassive, specifically their Dark Pictures series, as this will be a horror game that is all about the story and the decisions you, the player, make along the way. But I know a lot of people are not too excited about a narrative-focused Silent Hill game that doesn't feature gameplay, probably because Silent Hill Ascension left a sour taste in our mouth. But if done right, I do think Townfall might very well shock us, especially if it hits the same quality levels as Supermassive's original narrative-driven horror game, Until Dawn. Plus, the concept and theme of Silent Hill franchise, at least nowadays, is the perfect IP to be used in some sort of anthology series that focuses on the psychological horror stories told in each entry. And as long as I still get my traditional survival horror and psychological horror games from this franchise, I'm totally cool with them trying something new with Silent Hill Townfall. Townfall looks to release sometime in 2026, potentially, again, sometime in March if the rumors are true, and it will be available on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC. Number 14, Parasite Mutant. One horror franchise that I've been wanting to see a reboot of, or at the very least, a remaster collection of, is the Parasite Eve series. The first two games of this franchise were some of the best survival horror and horror RPG games ever created. Unfortunately, Square Enix doesn't appear to be getting anywhere close to doing anything with this IP anytime soon. Thankfully though, there are indie developers out there that are willing to make love letters to these games by taking a lot of inspiration from the original game specifically. I give you Parasite Mutant. Okay, so yeah, that name is a little on the nose, but the important thing is that this development team clearly has a lot of love for the original Parasite Eve, and they are currently developing a game that literally looks like Parasite Eve 3, honestly. Yeah, I'm totally ignoring Third Birthday. Moving on. Anyway, Parasite Mutant, like Parasite Eve, looks to combine elements of survival horror with traditional turn-based RPG mechanics to give us a very unique experience. Hell, even the protagonist of the game looks like Aya Brea, main protagonist of Parasite Eve, and the story appears to be somewhat similar. Horror RPGs is a subgenre of horror that I don't think are utilized in the modern day, so seeing that we're finally getting an indie developer create something that carries on the legacy of Parasite Eve this year has me really excited, to be completely honest with you guys. Anyway, Parasite Mutant looks to release on PlayStation 5 and PC sometime in 2026. Number 13, Liminal Point. Liminal Point is quietly shaping up to be one of my most anticipated indie survival horror games of 2026. Taking heavy inspiration from classic survival horror, the game centers around a protagonist that comes to an island that has been covered with a dense fog with creatures roaming around every corner. Sound familiar? Yeah, Liminal Point obviously takes a lot of inspiration from the survival horror game classics like Resident Evil, combined with the atmosphere and set pieces of Silent Hill, and then change out the gameplay with something similar to Signalis, a top-down survival horror experience that gives us a top-down view of the protagonist and the different monsters roaming around the island. On top of the gameplay and atmosphere, which are two things that really had me excited about Liminal Point, the story appears to be an extremely emotional and impactful one. In fact, I'm getting psychological horror vibes from the story, complete with a mystery element to it as well. We unfortunately don't have a release date for Liminal Point yet, but it's currently scheduled to release sometime in 2026 on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC. Number 12, The Occultist. The Occultist is quite honestly an underrated upcoming horror game releasing this year that I don't see many people talking about despite it looking really impressive. It combines elements of survival horror, psychological horror, stealth horror, and immersive horror walking simulators, while also adding a layer of mystery or detective vibes to the mix. You play as Alan Rebels, a paranormal investigator that comes to an island that is straight up filled with plenty of things that go bump in the night for you to deal with. The gameplay revolves mostly around puzzle solving, avoiding and hiding from enemies, and exploration. However, there's some unique mechanics involving Alan's abilities based on his paranormal powers that allow him to deal with the many dark forces in this game. The thing that I find myself fascinated with the most though are the immersive environments and set pieces that we get to explore. From an abandoned circus to a rundown building, it appears that we'll be investigating all sorts of paranormal cases on this island at different locations. And quite honestly, they look pretty terrifying, not gonna lie. Yeah, because I saw those baby dolls in the trailer and yeah, fuck that shit. Anyway, The Occultist will be releasing on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC sometime in 2026. Number 11, Darkwood 2. This announcement actually caught me off guard last year, but man am I glad we're finally getting a sequel to one of the best indie survival horror games ever created. The original game was mostly a survival game, and a really challenging one at that, but it was set inside of a world that was unbelievably terrifying. The woods in Darkwood, haha, see what I did there, create a constant feeling of dread, and it's arguably one of the best atmospheric experiences in the indie survival horror genre. The sequel promises to capture the same atmospheric horror environment and build on it by including more disturbing characters that you don't know if you can trust, new terrifying creatures to torment you throughout the nights, and other improvements that'll make the original game look like a cakewalk. We haven't seen much from this game so far, and quite honestly, there's not even a confirmation that Darkwood 2 is releasing in 2026. However, with it being a highly anticipated indie sequel and based on how much they showed off in that first teaser trailer, something tells me that this game is releasing sometime in the second half of 2026, just in time for Halloween. But yeah, that's just in my head, so maybe I'm completely off base here. Regardless, if you love games like The Forest that combines basic survival mechanics with an immersive horror setting, then Darkwood 2 will definitely be a must play for you in 2026. Currently, Darkwood 2 is only confirmed to be on PC and Xbox Game Pass, but based on how Microsoft has been handling their first-party video games, I wouldn't be too surprised to see that it's probably coming to Switch 2 and PlayStation 5 as well. Number 10, Decrepit. Decrepit is a recently announced game that was revealed at the Game Awards last month, and man, did it already make an impression on me. The gameplay looks like it takes Soulsborne combat, puts it in first person, and then sets it inside of a horror game with terrifying monster designs and gothic set pieces. Yeah, I really love the way that this game looks based on the few minutes of gameplay that we saw of it, and I can't wait to get my hands on it, even as someone that's not very good at Soulsborne games. Yeah, I'm pretty terrible at Soulsborne games, not gonna lie. It's also a roguelike game, as each death means you lose everything and you have to start at the very beginning of the game again. Yeah, it seems like a very punishing game, as you have to learn the entire floor plan of this creepy ass castle if you want to make it to the end successfully. The enemy designs, while we didn't see much, definitely gives me the creeps. Especially this image right here of some sort of giant skin-like crawler moving around the dungeon. Yeah, I don't know what the hell that is. All in all, Decrepit was a pleasant surprise for me at the Game Awards, as it went from a game that none of us heard about to cracking my top 10 most anticipated horror games of 2026 now. And yeah, I wouldn't be shocked one bit if it turned out to be the hardest horror game of 2026 too. Decrepit looks to release sometime in 2026, and currently it's only confirmed for PC at the time of recording this video. Number 9, The Sinking City 2. As a fan of the original Sinking City, I've been looking forward to the release of this highly anticipated sequel since it was first announced. We haven't seen much on this sequel, but the little bit that we have seen on this game looks to take everything that I loved about the original game, improve on it, and then add in elements that I think were missing the most, like a smoother combat system. See, the original game was a Lovecraftian survival horror game with a major focus on solving mysteries, mostly dealing with the supernatural and paranormal forces of the game. It was also an RPG that allowed you to have different dialogue options with a massive cast of characters in Oakmont. Not to mention, it wasn't a completely linear experience. However, there were a few things that I wish were done better in the original game. For example, while technically being described as a survival horror game, this Sinking City featured a combat system that was far from ideal, and the game itself wasn't very scary. In fact, it wasn't really taken seriously at all in terms of the horror side of things. However, the Sinking City 2 looks to really dive into survival horror a lot more than its predecessor. Looking at the gameplay reveal alone, we can see that the developers took a lot of inspiration from Resident Evil 2 Remake, and while the mystery aspect of the original game is clearly still present here, it looks like the monster designs and atmospheric horror this time around are going to feel a lot more like a survival horror game. Honestly, I'm a huge fan of horror games inspired by Lovecraft, and since Alone in the Dark Remake was nowhere near as good as I wanted it to be, I'm really hopeful that the Sinking City 2 will scratch that itch for me and be the Lovecraftian survival horror experience I've been wanting for a while now. The Sinking City 2 looks to release in the first half of 2026 on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC. Number 8, Hellraiser Revival. I'll be honest, Hellraiser was one of the few slasher movies that I never really connected with. With that being said, this game looks absolutely insane, and I can't believe how excited I am for it. Who knew? A Hellraiser game's gonna be fun, and I'm actually gonna really enjoy it. I never would have said those words, not gonna lie. Anyway, Hellraiser Revival is a first-person action survival horror game that puts you into the shoes of a man named Aiden who dives headfirst into the hellscape that is the Labyrinth to save his girlfriend. What follows is potentially one of the most disturbing and gory games I've ever seen, and man, does this game put you through a lot of physical and psychological torment, it seems. Seriously, the trailer itself looks so fucked up that I'm actually terrified of showcasing some footage here, because I'm worried that YouTube will be like, yo bro, this is a little too much, man. And you know what? As a fan of Saw and other extremely gory horror flicks, I'm all for this game. Yeah, seriously, the more messed up that this game gets, the more invested I'll be. And because it's set inside of a hellscape essentially, you'll get to experience all sorts of horrific visuals that quite honestly might be unlike anything we've ever experienced in a horror game. It's funny, back when I was a kid, these movie licensed video games were always hit or miss, with a miss being more likely in most cases. However, it actually seems like we're in this era where iconic horror films make for some really intriguing video games. Hellraiser, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Alien Isolation, and even Dead by Daylight is the celebration of a lot of iconic horror movies and games all in one place. Actually, we have not one but two iconic horror films getting video game adaptations this year, and actually we'll be talking about the next one in just a moment. But first, Hellraiser Revival releases on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC sometime this year. Now, about that second horror film getting a horror game, yeah, let's talk about that. Number 7, Halloween. Not gonna lie, it's kind of bittersweet talking about this next entry, as I'm really excited about the new Halloween game releasing in September of this year, but I'm also pretty sad that this game is essentially the main reason why Michael Myers, Haddonfield, and Laurie Strode are being removed from Dead by Daylight later this month. Anyway, if you're a fan of Dead by Daylight, then you'll probably appreciate this game a lot, as it's essentially an asymmetrical horror game being created with the Halloween IP specifically. Now, the first thing that has me extremely excited about this game is the development team behind it, IllFonic. In case that name doesn't ring a bell to you, it's the same team that created another asymmetrical horror game with an iconic horror slasher, Friday the 13th. Yeah, that game was incredible, as it took the survivors and allowed them to actually fight against Jason Voorhees versus the traditional Dead by Daylight formula of just trying to escape the killer as fast as possible. Sadly, because of the issues with the ownership of Jason Voorhees and the Friday the 13th IP, IllFonic was forced to shut down the servers for the game. So essentially, Halloween is kind of a spiritual successor to Friday the 13th, and as someone that absolutely loved that game, yeah, I'm excited to see what they do with this new IP. Here's a quick breakdown, as I'm already spending a lot of time on this entry just talking about the history of Friday the 13th and Halloween, but Halloween will feature both an asymmetrical 1v4 game mode as well as a single player mode where Michael Myers is the main character. Now, the gameplay specifically works a little bit different than most asymmetrical horror games. So instead of running away or killing Michael yourself, your job is to actually notify and alert as many townspeople as possible of Michael's presence so that you can build up an army, patrols, and gather other resources that will ultimately end the nightmare. As Michael, your task is simple: kill as many NPCs as possible. What's not to love here, guys? Halloween releases on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC on September 8th of this year. Number 6, Reanimal. Last year I dived into a horror subgenre that for whatever reason I hadn't really experienced much prior to 2025. That subgenre was the horror puzzle platformer genre. You know, games like Little Nightmares, Limbo, and Inside. Anyways, after diving into this whole new world essentially, I became obsessed with these games, and ultimately I found myself looking for every single obscure game in this genre, like Creepy Tales and Bramble. It's a genre that I've only recently begun to appreciate in a major way due to how immersive the atmospheres of these games are and how disturbing yet simple the enemy designs are. But yeah, there's no denying that Little Nightmares, especially that second game, is the best horror puzzle platformer game of all time. However, after the second game, the studio that developed the first two games were purchased by a different studio, but the IP for Little Nightmares was left behind with Bandai Namco, leaving the creators of Little Nightmares, Tarshire Studios, without the IP that made them so popular in the horror landscape. Thankfully, we'll finally get to see their spiritual successor come to life next month in the form of Reanimal. Now, Reanimal looks to take a lot of the things that we loved about the Little Nightmares series, add in a co-op experience, kind of like the third game of the Little Nightmares series, even though they didn't develop that game, and create a brand new dark universe that still feels vaguely familiar. And I'd argue some of the enemy designs in Reanimal looks more disturbing than the ones they created for the Little Nightmares universe, perhaps because these designs take a little more inspiration from animals than the Little Nightmares series did, hence the name, I guess. Anyway, Reanimal is set to release on February 13th on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and Nintendo Switch, and also PC. And guess what? It has a demo available right now to try, so yeah, go check it out. Number 5, Ontos. One of the most notable horror developers out there is Frictional Games, the developers of games like the Amnesia series and Soma. So yeah, imagine my excitement at the Game Awards last month when Frictional Games announced that they were working on a new immersive, narrative-driven horror game. If there's one development team that never fails to deliver immersive, atmospheric horror environments in their video games, it's Frictional Games. But low-key, Soma is perhaps one of their most unique games, as it's a sci-fi horror game instead of your traditional dark castle or bunker setting that the development team normally focuses on. So Soma always felt different from most of their other games, and it's arguably one of their best and most immersive game yet. But yeah, seeing that they are jumping back into the sci-fi horror genre once again with Ontos, I was through the roof with this reveal. The game looks great from the small bit of it that we've seen so far, and it looks like, well, just like with Soma, that the game is diving deep into some really disturbing yet impactful themes, but with the sci-fi setting. In the case of Ontos, it looks like the player will be put through a lot of different trials that'll require them to make tough decisions with other patients, and unlike most Frictional games, it seems like the game will be less linear and feature more endings this time around. Don't get me wrong, most Frictional games feature multiple different endings, but honestly, there were never that many endings, and on top of that, the endings were most of the time decided by a late game decision made right before the final boss. Ontos looks like it wants to test the player throughout the entire experience, making each decision you make a tough one, and that quite honestly has me really excited. Ontos releases on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC sometime this year. Number 4, Ill. Ill is a horror game that everybody, myself included, was pretty cautious about. I mean, this game just screams scam, and it just looked like a game that was way too good to be true. From the visuals of this indie survival horror game being more impressive looking than a lot of AAA video games out there, to the gameplay being so dynamic that the enemies in this game uses some sort of AI technology that allows them to interact with the environment and use random things just sitting around as weapons, to the main character being voiced by the Leon S. Kennedy of the Remake timeline. Yeah, this game just didn't seem real. Despite that though, it came back with a bang last year as they once again reminded us how impressive this upcoming survival horror game could potentially be. This game has it all: impressive visuals complete with lots of gore and body horror, enemy designs that are straight up disturbing as fuck, potentially more disturbing than most Silent Hill enemies, an immersive first-person experience that blows us all away with its atmospheric environments, and so much more than that. Yeah, this game will definitely lean one of two different ways, and there's no middle ground for it. It'll either be one of the most impressive indie survival horror games ever created, completely blowing away all of the competition and shutting the naysayers down once and for all, or it'll be a major disappointment and one of those video games that promised way too much and overhyped itself only to severely disappoint us in the end. Time will tell though. Anyway, we currently don't have a release date for ill, but with the marketing on the game finally ramping up, I expect that we'll see it released sometime this year on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC. Number 3, Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake. Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly is one of the best horror games I've ever played. In fact, if you watch my video on the top 100 horror games of all time, shameless plug there by the way, go watch the video if you haven't already. Fatal Frame 2 is actually my third favorite horror game of all time, behind Resident Evil Remake and RE2 OG. Everything that you could possibly want from a survival horror game centered around ghosts is in this game. You have extremely likable protagonists in the form of Mio and Mayu. You have terrifying ghosts that'll literally keep you up all night, like the Curio twins and the Broken Neck Woman. And you even have one of the most emotional psychological horror stories ever told in this game. And yeah, while the original game hasn't aged the best, as the mechanics in it are nowhere near as impressive as the ones featured in its successor, Fatal Frame 3 The Tormented, Fatal Frame 2 is still a masterpiece I love revisiting consistently. Side note, this isn't even the first time this game got a remake. The Wii edition of Fatal Frame 2 was basically a remake too, as it featured new scenes, improved visuals, and quality of life improvements and mechanics that made this version of the game far better than the original. Despite that though, I'm someone that always stood behind video games getting the remake treatment as long as it's done right and it's respectful of the source material. So while I don't think we need another remake of Fatal Frame 2, I'm extremely excited to dive into it, as I'm sure there will be a lot of new content added to the game outside of improved visuals, dialogue, and everything else you would expect from a remake. Hell, the Wii edition added additional difficulties and endings, so I imagine we'll get something similar to that at the very least. Regardless, I'm very much looking forward to revisiting one of the best horror games ever created in a new light, and hopefully, if this game does well enough, we'll see the series revived, as we haven't seen a mainline entry in this franchise since 2014, almost 12 years ago. Regardless, Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake will release on PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch 2, Xbox Series, and PC on March 12th of this year. Number 2, Danganronpa 2x2. Unless you're a hardcore fan of Nerd Space games and you've heard me talking about this in streams or on Discord, a lot of you might not know that Danganronpa, the trilogy, is arguably my third favorite video game trilogy of all time. Yeah, I love these games so much, and when the team behind this incredible series decided to move on from the franchise and do other things, I'll admit I was very disappointed. I didn't understand it, because despite the premise of these games remaining the same with each mainline entry, they've always managed to surprise me with the amount of twists and turns in the story. For those of you that's never played a Danganronpa game, each game features a cast of different characters going through a similar situation. A bunch of students are brought together, forced to play some sort of killing game, and ultimately each round of the game ends with you trying to find out which of your fellow classmates murdered the victim. Essentially, the franchise is one giant whodunit mystery with a very disturbing twist to it. The gameplay is mostly in the form of visual novel dialogue, exploring the area and building relationships with the other characters, and doing objectives during the class trials to reveal the culprit, but really it's all about the story in these games, not the gameplay. Okay, sorry, just got a little distracted there, but going back to Danganronpa 2x2, the reason why I'm so excited about this game is because not only is it a remake of the second game of the series, my favorite game of the franchise by the way, but it will also feature a brand new campaign that changes up the entire story, plot, twist, and everything else, essentially giving us a whole new game alongside the remake of the second game. Yeah, I'm all for this, obviously. Sure, I'd rather have a Danganronpa 4, but honestly, I'll take what I can get at this point, as this is an additional campaign, which will scratch that Danganronpa itch I have until they eventually try giving us a 4th mainline game. Maybe, possibly, hopefully, God, please give it to me. Anyway, Danganronpa 2x2 releases on PlayStation 5, Switch 1 and 2, Xbox Series, and PC sometime in 2026. Number 1, Resident Evil Requiem. Surprising absolutely nobody, obviously my most anticipated horror game of 2026 is RE9. I mean, hello, hardcore Resident Evil fan here who's a content creator that primarily covers the RE franchise. So obviously this is a game that I'm most excited about, and man, I'm just dying to get my hands on this game as soon as possible. There's a lot to say about RE9, starting with the fact that this will be the first brand new Resident Evil game since Village, released in 2021. Yeah, it's been almost 5 years since the last mainline Resident Evil game, ignore remakes obviously. This will also be the farthest in the timeline we've gone in the series, excluding the Shadows of Rose DLC, which ultimately sets the stage for the future of the franchise. It's a big game, and Capcom is treating it like that as well, based on a lot of things. First, it's releasing during the 30th anniversary celebration of the RE franchise. Also, we're seeing the return of fan favorite Leon S. Kennedy after he's been MIA in the lore of the franchise since 2014, courtesy of the CG film Death Island. But most importantly, we're returning to Raccoon City, and the title of the game, Requiem, basically tells us that this game will have a deep connection to the lore of the entire series. I mean, how can it not with a name like that? Returning character from a spin-off game in the form of Alyssa, both action, horror, and survival horror sections split evenly for the fans, returning to arguably the most iconic location of the entire series in the form of Raccoon City, and the combination of not only third person, but first person perspective that'll allow you to play and experience the game that fits your personal preference. Yeah, seriously, Resident Evil Requiem looks like it's fan service the game at this point, and there's so much to get excited about this game, and I, for one, cannot wait to get my hands on it. And yeah, dare I say it, I'm more excited about this game than GTA 6. Sue me, guys. Resident Evil Requiem releases on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, Nintendo Switch 2, and PC on February 27th of this year. But that does it for this episode of Nerdspace Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what upcoming horror game are you most excited about. Also, don't forget to let me know any horror games releasing this year that I didn't cover on my list. I try to play as many horror games as I can possibly get throughout the year, so I definitely don't want to miss out on any upcoming horror hidden gems. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also, leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerdspace Games. Take care.